Beautiful.
Today I want to start a short series about building or setting up an ELR rifle and the processes and the thoughts to go through and actually build an ELR rifle. Now, to start off with, the definition in what I'm talking about, and I shouldn't say the definition, my definition in the way of ELR or extreme long range shooting is essentially about when you're taking it past the normal long range side of things, so past its normal effective range. In most cases I'm talking about going into where the bullet has gone through the transonic zone into a subsonic zone, but it isn't a particular range. It is not particularly 1,500 yards or 2,000 yards or 2,500 yards or 4,000 yards. It's not particularly any one of those ranges. It's simply taking a particular caliber and taking it to where you're using a lot of minutes of angle in the way of elevation, and the bullet's going to travel a long way for that caliber. So i.e. This is a little 223, and taking it out to 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 yards is extreme range shooting for this rifle. It's not what I'd call extreme range shooting for a 338 Lapua, or even the likes of a 300 Win Mag. It's more in the place of long range shooting for a larger caliber. So it is in context to what the rifle is. So with that in mind, and talking about that sort of shooting, what I want to go through essentially is that the details you should go to get there now, or build that rifle or put together that sort of package. I should say, if you're just building a ELR rifle to look at or to take to the range and shoot to 100 yards and 400 yards and that's all you can do, then really doesn't matter. Buy the features you want, bolt it all together. It really doesn't need to ever stretch itself, so it doesn't need to worry about the components. But if you really are about creating a long range rifle, an extreme range rifle, then these are some of the ingredients. First of all, I would go through with essentially what you're going to need to do in that process of extreme range shooting. You're going to need to be able to work with well, two main features. One, you need to have a distance to shoot over. So if you really don't have and are not going to go beyond the normal range, and the normal range has only got 400 or 600 yards, then it isn't really ever going to be ELR, like I said. But if you do have a real range to go to, something that does have 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, even if it's only once every couple of years, but that's where you're really planning on shooting it and you're going to that distance, then that distance is important. So once again, it means that essentially if you have a place to go to but it's about a mile, it does mean that you can ELR shoot, you can set up an ELR rifle, but you're really talking more about taking something in the smaller caliber, the 223, the 243, the 260, the smaller calibers that are actually still going to be shooting right out to their extent in their range. So you're getting the same effect of shooting. You've got to go through the same processes, you've got to use the same abilities to get that job done as shooting 3,000 yards with your 338 Lapua. So your distance you actually have to use is very relevant. The next thing I would say is that at some stage you're going to have to learn how to use ballistic apps or ballistic algorithms essentially in some form, whether that's spreadsheets, whether that's out of data you've downloaded off the internet, or whether there's books or other people's paperwork, or there's apps for iPhones. There is ways to get this stuff. You're going to need to do it. And my advice on how to get the caliber, working with the range and make the choices right from the beginning is to actually get those apps, get that process, whichever one it is, whether you're spending a lot of money or you're doing it for free, it doesn't really matter, but you get it to where you get a good understanding of what you need. With that, that's going to tell you things where you can start to work out that, okay, I've got this range, I'm going to use, with that, make your selections, try things around, I'm going to use this caliber and I need this weight bullet. So then you can go through it and make choices out of what actually works for what you want to try and achieve. Largely, in at least my way of doing ELR shooting, it's about trying to achieve more than what is normal, more than what is the accepted maximum, trying to get out past that point and trying to get to make everything work and go through those processes of understanding wind calls, of understanding what you have to do with your load, understanding those features about the process. But the likes of a ballistic engine, for another way of putting it, essentially is the building blocks where you can start from that place. So then you get into, with that information, you know how far you're going to shoot, you have played the games with the programs and found out this is the calibre I'd like to do and this is like to get here. What that's going to give you is essentially a building block to start your rifle. So what I've got here is actually a 223. This is a good example. I've obviously got some large rifles which shoot a very long way. This is probably one of the smallest ones, or the smallest one that we actually shoot with. It's still shot out to over 1800 yards with a 223. Now, what we had to do that, when we selected this rifle, we went through some basics of what I would be suggesting. Not absolutely important, but still what I'd be suggesting. And that was a heavy barrel. But it's not just a heavy barrel, it was a heavy barrel with a 1 1/8 twist. Now, I wanted to go for the 1 1/8 twist because, right, with doing the maths to start off with, I wanted to run an 80 grain bullet. So the average 223 running a 1 in 14 or 1 in 16, some of them, but 1 in 14, 1 in 12, that sort of number, set up to shoot a 55 grain bullet. It can't spin the larger bullet, so it can't stabilise the larger bullet, so they're never going to shoot out to where this rifle shot out to. So essentially that's an important feature. You might have, you know, we have a 243 that we've shot out to 2,000 yards. It shoots very accurately out to 1,500 yards. It's only a 1 in 10 twist barrel, so we could go a little further and it'll work better, but still with a 1 in 10 twist it does its job very well. Anyhow, with that side of things, it means the barrel is very important. The next feature, and probably the next most important thing that goes into the selection of a rifle, if you've got one you're already playing with, it's got the right spin, or it's already in the cupboard, it's a hunting rifle, it's already got spin that will run the decent bullet, then great, you move forward with that, you don't need to spend anything. If you're looking at buying one, then there are some features that are very relevant in the way of the brand. Now, a lot of people get hooked up on these are more accurate than those. So this is a more accurate rifle, so I'll buy a more accurate rifle. This is, once again, this is a little Seiko, which essentially we bought along those lines. It was a very accurate rifle, it had the right twist on it, the twist was probably one of the key ingredients, but they were known as a very accurate little rifle. What we didn't realise at that stage, because we didn't do enough research, was essentially getting the rails, getting the features, getting bits and pieces to work, getting a bottom metal, even getting the stocks and that sort of stuff was quite a bit harder. They're getting a bit easier now, but it was quite a bit harder. I should also say that it isn't just what is out there everywhere, it's what you can get. It's what's actually the availability on it, what comes into your country, what comes into your state, what's actually happening. It's very relevant to know. I'm a bit of a fan of the Remington 700, not because it's the best rifle, but because it's one of the rifles that does, you're able to buy everything for you. You're able to buy bolt-ons, you don't have to do too much work with them, in the way of they will bolt together as a very good rifle with lots of options. Now, a lot more, the likes of the Tikka, the likes of the Hauer, the likes of, there's a lot of other rifles, I won't go into all the names of them, there's a lot of others that have a similar amount of bolt-on parts you can buy for them, but it is a relevant feature to research. You do it step by step and find out what's going to be easier on that process. This is another good instance to explain with this little Seiko, is that essentially one of the features that to run the extreme long range bullet for these, we are doing a couple of things with this little fella. The cases struggle to fit enough powder, so we actually fire them before we can get our full amount of powder in it. So slightly expanding the case, fire forming it to the chamber to get a little bit bigger case to be able to run the amount of powder in there that we wanted to be able to shoot the bullet. The other thing is we run an overall length right out to where we're pushing it right out onto the lands, or just the 10th hour off the lands, but with doing that the bullet is too long to run in the magazine, and it's not, in this particular case, the Seiko's case, or this is the little Seiko 85, the actual framework that's in underneath and the bottom of the action won't let the long round up inside there. So it still works fine. I've built a little aluminium tray that goes in here so it's easy to single feed, and we can pull that tray out, and with running shorter loads, when you're running the more, when you want to work the bolt and you want to do more the magazine loads, they still hold 6 loads in their little magazine underneath here. We run a shorter load and it'll still function like that. But there is definitely if we'd bought a different model of rifle, we probably could get the same shooting features, in the way of the same accuracy, without having to deal with those little fights. Now don't get me wrong, I think sometimes the challenge is half the game. It's certainly half of what ELR shooting is for the way and the way we do it, but it's a feature to understand. Do your research really thoroughly. Before we go into other features, and I'll do that in the next stage of things when I start to talk about more, but one bit I would like to basically comment on, and from what I've seen, there's very few, at least modern guns, that don't shoot very accurately when you set them up properly. I can't honestly say in a factory gun that I've seen one particular barrel and action shoot a lot better than another barrel and action. Certainly the guns can shoot terribly with some of the, for want of a better word, some of the crappy plastic stocks that they'll come on, some of the way they're set up. Yes, they don't shoot very accurately. But once you go through and set them up and free float the barrel and put it in a good stock and do all the rest of the work, you really can take it to a nice place. So, you know, we have in another quick one that we've done things with, our 300 Win Mag. The setup with that, it shot reasonably well. It was in a pretty good stock to start off with, but it was quite, mods to it made it shoot a lot better very quickly. It shoots very, very accurately, up there in the level of a custom gun. And the actual barrel, as all of my rifles, the barrel and the action, well not all of them, but most of them, the barrel and the actions are stock. They're factory barrels, they're factory actions, they work very well. So last two things, actually, that I want to touch on, is that essentially one of the pieces of research, and this is more talking about the larger calibers, is the actual strength of your action. They're not all the same. So if you're running hotter loads, which you tend to be in ELR stuff, you're trying to get the maximum bullet speed so you can try and do it with the minimum amount of minutes of angle or elevation to be able to get there, the actual strength of it matters. So that's something to do some research on. The last thing that I will touch on this score is essentially for this style of shooting, you actually are after extreme accuracy. You want the thing to be able to shoot very, very, very accurately, because out there you're dealing with a lot of other conditions. You don't need to be dealing with a random setup in your rifle, so very accurately. The larger the caliber, the harder that is to pull off. It's the simple nature of a rifle. It's the simple nature of a rifle and a shooter combination. The more bang that's going on, the harder it is to hold very tight groups. The easier it is with a smaller caliber. So there is something to be said for, say, taking something like this, a 223, and shooting 1500 yards. It actually is something that will teach you good form. It still requires you to do things well, but it doesn't push you around as much, and it's not quite as hard to do. Don't get me wrong, to take a 223 and shoot 1500 yards versus your 300 Win Mag or your 3 out the Pua and shoot 1500 yards, the abilities of the bullet are a lot easier for that larger rifle. But so like I said, there is a yin and yang that goes with that. Anyway, that's the first step of this. I want to go through, like I said, a short series to go through basically, if you want to get into ELR, the rifle choices to make, setup choices on the rifle to try and get you to where you have an extreme long range rifle.